The morning wind blew softly across the valley, brushing over the golden fields and the quiet roofs of the small Vietnamese village. The smell of damp soil and wood smoke filled the air. Sam stood by the chicken coop, her hands dusted with cornmeal, staring absently toward the horizon. The sun was rising, but her heart felt heavy, as if a storm was waiting just beyond the mountains. It had been 3 days since Lee left. He hadn't told her much, only that he had been assigned to a special mission. His eyes that morning, though calm and confident, carried a weight that frightened her. She could still hear his words echoing in her mind. "Sam, if I can't call for a while, don't worry. Just take care of yourself and the farm." But how could she not worry? Lee wasn't just another man in uniform. To her, he was the quiet protector who had once changed her life, the one who helped her when everyone else turned away. Years ago, when Sam's stepmother and her stepsister Bic had forced her to leave home, it was Lee who brought her to this small farm, helped her build a shelter, and taught her to start over. Since then, he had become the heartbeat of her peace. Now, that peace was gone. The chickens clucked softly as she poured out the last of their feed. The sound grounded her for a moment, but inside her chest, anxiety tightened like a rope. She tried to shake it off, reminding herself that Lee was strong, trained, brave, everything she was not. Still, when night came and the farm fell silent, except for the rustling of trees, she could almost hear his footsteps on the gravel path, as if he were about to return. But each time she looked, there was only darkness. That same morning, miles away in a small border station, Lieu, Lee's commanding officer, stood by the radio, frowning. The signal had gone dead the night before. The last transmission from Lee's team mentioned movement near the Mekong River, and then, nothing. "Commander Lieu," a young officer said, rushing in, "we've lost all contact with Lee's units." Lieu didn't answer immediately. He stared at the flickering green light on the communication panel, feeling a cold heaviness settle in his gut. "Run the frequency check again," he ordered quietly, "and keep trying. I don't care how long it takes." As the officer nodded and left, Lieu leaned back against the wall, rubbing his temples. He had known Lee for years, first as a trainee, then as one of his most dependable men. Lee was calm under pressure, fearless in the face of danger. If even he had gone silent, it could only mean one thing: something had gone terribly wrong. He looked out through the dusty window toward the forest, the edges of his vision trembling with unease. In his mind, he saw Sam, the woman Lee had spoken about in quiet moments between missions. The way Lee's voice softened when he mentioned her name told Lieu everything he needed to know. "If anything happens to me," Lee had once said, half joking, half serious, tell Sam not to wait too long." Now, standing in the dim light of the command post, Lieu felt that memory slice through him like a knife. He turned back to the map, his voice firm but low. "Prepare a search unit," he said. "We're going to Cambodia." Meanwhile, in the small farmhouse by the hill, Sam knelt by the clay stove, trying to start a fire. Her hands were cold and unsteady. A tear fell onto the dry wood before it could ignite. She didn't know that, far away, the man who had promised to return, the one who once lit her world, was now missing in the depths of a foreign land. And the man who might hold the key to finding him was already on his way. The wind outside grew stronger, sweeping through the banana trees like a whisper of fate. Sam looked up, feeling a sudden chill run down her spine. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was not an ordinary silence. It was the silence before a storm. Days turned into weeks, yet no message from Lee ever arrived. The embassy offered only silence and cautious promises. "We're doing everything we can," they said, but to Lieu, the words sounded hollow. Every night, she sat by the small window of their home, the rain tapping softly on the glass like an echo of her heartbeat. She imagined Lee walking through the dense Cambodian jungle, his boots sinking into wet soil, his face streaked with sweat and fear. She could almost hear his voice, calm, determined, reassuring her that he would come back. But reality whispered otherwise. News spread that Li's entire unit had gone dark near the border of Mondulkiri, where the jungle swallowed signals and men alike. Liu couldn't sleep. She began to write letters she would never send to Li, to herself, to God. Each word carried pain and longing. If you can hear me, just hold on. Don't give up. One morning, she received a call. The voice on the other end was hushed, uncertain. There's been movement. Someone saw a man fitting Li's description near Camp. Her heart skipped a beat. For the first time in weeks, hope, fragile but bright, flickered through the fog of fear. She packed her things, tears blurring her vision, and whispered, "Wait for me, Li, I'm coming." The road to Kampot was long, winding, and cloaked in mist. Liu sat by the window of a rickety bus, her hands trembling as she held Li's photograph. Every bump on the dirt road jolted her heart. Every shadow outside the window seemed alive, as if the jungle itself was watching her. The air smelled of damp earth and gasoline. Children ran barefoot along the roadside, waving at strangers, while the sun sank behind thick trees like a dying ember. Liu's mind replayed the last moment she saw Li, standing by the airport gate, smiling faintly before turning away. That smile had kept her alive for weeks. When she arrived in Kampot, the town felt strange, too quiet, too heavy with unspoken secrets. She found a small guest house by the river, its owner a frail old woman with kind eyes. "You're looking for someone," the woman said softly, noticing the photograph in Liu's hand. Liu nodded. "My fiancé, his name is Li. He was on a mission here." The woman hesitated, then whispered, "There are rumors. Men hiding in the mountains. Soldiers, maybe survivors." Liu's breath caught. "Where?" The woman looked away, her eyes glistening with fear. "Some never returned from there. Be careful, child. Cambodia keeps its secrets." But Liu's heart was already set. That night, under the humming of insects and the whisper of the Mekong, she made a silent promise. Even if the jungle took everything from her, she would find Li. Before dawn, Liu left the small guest house with only a flashlight, a map, and Li's picture pressed close to her heart. Mist rolled across the land like breath from an unseen mouth. The road narrowed into a trail, swallowed by the dense green of the Cambodian jungle. Her shoes sank into mud. Branches scratched her arms. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet leaves and decay. Every sound seemed alive. The chirping of insects, the distant call of birds, the rustle of something unseen. Fear followed her like a shadow, yet her love pushed her forward. Hours later, she found what looked like the remains of a camp. Torn fabric, broken crates, and footprints fading into the soil. Liu's heart pounded as she picked up a small metal tag, engraved with a single name, Li. Her knees gave way. "You were here," she whispered, tears falling onto the dirt. But before she could gather her thoughts, a rustle came from behind her. A figure emerged, thin, limping, covered in mud and blood. "Li," she gasped. The man's face turned slowly toward her. For a moment, she saw eyes she had known all her life, weary, haunted, but alive. "Liu, is that you?" His voice broke like a forgotten melody. She ran to him, trembling, her hands clutching his torn shirt. But even as she held him, she felt his body shivering, not just from exhaustion, but from something darker lurking behind the trees. Because in that moment, the jungle fell silent, as if warning them both that this reunion came with a price. The story of Li and Liu is not just about loss and reunion, it is about the quiet, unyielding power of love. It reminds us that when the world turns dark and uncertain, love becomes a compass, guiding us through the storm. Liu's journey into the dangerous jungles of Cambodia shows that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. She could have waited, she could have given up, but her heart refused to accept silence. It was her faith, fragile, trembling, yet unwavering, that brought her to Li's side. And Li, even in his suffering, held on to the hope that someone was still searching for him. That hope became his strength. From their story, we learn that love is more than just emotion, it is endurance, patience, and sacrifice. It is believing in someone even when the world tells you they are gone. And Lee, even in his suffering, held on to the hope that someone was still searching for him. That hope became his strength. From their story, we learn that love is more than just emotion. It is endurance, patience, and sacrifice. It is believing in someone even when the world tells you they are gone.